Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome back to GoldwingDocs, episode 9 of You Got Questions, We Got Answers, coming up next. By far the most popular series we've ever done, the Q&A. I can't keep up with all the questions. If I answered all the questions that I receive on here on this video, these videos would be hours long. A lot of the questions that I'm getting, they're a little more complex or they're more specific, so I'm directing those questions to the GoldwingDocs website forum where we have a huge number, 90,000 people, really 90,000 Goldwing owners just like you, who have all the answers to any problem you might have. So let's get to this episode's questions. The first one is from Formatech. Scott, I have this phobia about my cables, throttles, brakes, etc. breaking on the road. I could not find any video that explains the process of replacement or temporary fixes. If you ever think of addressing this topic, that would be great. And he has a 2008 1800. Okay, well, the good news is that your bike only has 2 cables and they are redundant. So let's talk about the cables on the Goldwings. On the early 4-cylinder Goldwings, you had throttle cables and you had a clutch cable. That continued up till the 1200, I think it was. They switched to a hydraulic clutch. I think that's right. It was either the 1200 or the 1500. I'm pretty sure it was the 1200 where they switched to hydraulic rather than cable clutch. On anything from that point forward, the only cables left are your throttle cables. And yes, there are 2. So let's talk first about the clutch cable. The clutch cable, obviously you pull the handle in here, it pulls on a cable that runs through a tube down to the clutch where it's connected to the actuating arm at the other end. That is the most critical cable on the bike. Why? Because it is under the most tension. If you look at the amount of force that's being applied when that clutch cable pulls, it can be in the range of hundreds of pounds, believe it or not, because you have a huge lever here that is traveling a couple of inches that's actually in a cable that's only moving maybe a quarter, a half, and an inch. So you have a tremendous mechanical advantage there that is putting a tremendous force on that cable. That's why your clutch cable is so thick. When that breaks, boy, are you in a world of hurt because, well, can you ride your bike? Yes. If you can get it into first gear and then push start the bike in gear, once it starts, it's going to go, and then you can shift. It's not great for the bike. It's actually really hard on the transmission, but you can do clutchless upshifts and downshifts. And the way you do that is by adjusting the throttle so that there is a minimal amount of load on the drive line. So basically, if you're riding along, you know if you open the throttle, you've got a little bit of tension on the driveline because the bike is accelerating. If you close the throttle, you've got tension on the driveline because the bike is decelerating. What you want is that little space right in between where you're matching exactly the engine speed to the speed of the bike, so there's very little load on the driveline and hence the transmission. And once you've got it there, you can kick the shifter up or down into the next gear probably without doing too much damage. You really don't want to try to do that on a regular basis because you will round off the dogs in your transmission. That causes things like transmissions popping out of gear, which you really don't want. Now, I do remember a number of years ago on the forum, there was a couple that had their 1100 break a clutch cable when they were far from home. And what they did is he disconnected the clutch cable from the lever and he had a pair of vice grips in his toolkit. And he clamped the vice grips onto the end of the cable in a way that you could lever the clutch in and out, and he handed it to his wife on the back seat. And then over the intercom, he would just tell her, in, out, and she would operate the clutch by yanking on the cable with the vice grips while he shifted the gears, and they made it home over a several-day trip doing that. So it's possible. If you need to do it, you can. Can you carry a spare cable? Sure. If you have a spare cable you want to carry with it, if you're really paranoid about it, you can disconnect the cable. A lot of times you can just tie or tape the new cable to the old cable and then just pull it through. So if you have the tools, you're on the road, you have a spare cable, then that's maybe an option for you. Now, all Goldwings, except for the newest Goldwing, which has throttle by wire, have throttle cables. And there's actually 2 in there for redundancy. So there's a pull cable and a push cable. And if you take this apart, there's actually 2 cables on a cam in there. So what happens is when you turn the throttle one way, it pulls on the pull cable. And when you close the throttle, it pulls on the push cable. So the cables kind of do this. And the reason for that is because if you were to have a stuck open throttle, if the throttle bound up or something down in the engine and you only had a pull cable, you might not be able to actually close the throttle because if you have only a pull cable and you close the throttle, at the other end of the cable, it's just going to do this. It's not actually going to push the throttle closed. So what you want is to have two cables so it actually can pull the throttle open and pull the throttle closed. That said, if your throttle is working properly, you can get away with only one cable. So even if one of these cables breaks, you're probably fine as long as you don't get a stuck throttle. I mean, how often does that happen? But as long as you have a properly operating throttle, you can actually operate your throttle just fine with a broken cable. Such that most people that have a broken cable don't even know they have a broken cable. The cable that most often breaks is the pull cable because it's pulling against the tension of the spring on the throttle body. The push cable actually pulls with the spring, so it is rarely under any kind of load. So it's almost always the pull cable that breaks. And if you start feeling your throttle's actually kind of gritty or binding up and it's not turning quite right, you may want to have a look at that pull cable and make sure it hasn't broken. On a four-cylinder, you can actually look and see it. On the newer bikes, like the 1500, 1800, you actually have to take body panels off to see that butterfly that you twist on the throttle body that gets twisted by turning the throttle on your handlebars. If one of those cables is broken and you twist this, you'll be able to see at the other end that the cable is not working properly. So if you're going on a trip and you're paranoid, check your throttle cables before you go and you're probably going to be just fine. All right, number 2, trend setter. How do I ride to optimize fuel efficiency? Okay, this is really simple. Don't use your throttle. Okay, well, not quite that simple, but avoid using your throttle as much as possible. So basically, the farther open you turn this, the more fuel gets used. The higher your tachometer is going, the more fuel you're using. If you are accelerating hard, you're using a ton of fuel. You can use 10 times as much fuel accelerating hard than you do when you're just cruising at speed. Also, plan ahead. If you see a stoplight coming up, don't race up there and then suddenly brake in time just to stop. Gauge yourself. Start slowing down. Just let the engine brake take it. Just start slowing down a little bit so that by the time you get there, the lights turn green and then you don't have to come to a stop and accelerate, because when it comes to fuel, acceleration is your enemy. Acceleration is what uses up all the fuel. Acceleration and, well, speed. That's the second part of it. Our bikes are not aerodynamic. They may look aerodynamic, but they're really not. If you compare a bike to a car is far more aerodynamic than a bike. A bike is just pushing this huge misshapen thing through the wind, and you got riders on top of it and open areas without a nice smooth car enclosure. So they're really terrible. They are very draggy. When you are riding at speed, you cause a lot of drag from the wind, and the amount of that drag increases as a square of your speed. As you start going faster and faster, the amount of drag increases exponentially. So the amount of drag you create at 70 miles per hour is way higher than you would at 60 miles per hour, for instance. So simply slowing down on the highway will make a huge difference on your fuel mileage. So if you're trying to get the most mileage out of your bike, maybe you're trying to do a long trip, slow down, plan ahead, avoid acceleration. And when you do come off a light, don't crack your throttle open and whip your head back. That's using all your fuel. Accelerate gently, smoothly. The more gentle and smooth you're riding, the better your fuel mileage. I hope that helps. Okay, number 3 from Gregory Consani. Hey Scott, I just bought an 87 Goldwing. The battery died because of cold. Probably not, but a lot of people think that's what causes them to die. And because I don't have a battery tender, but I got it started, I let it run for about 10 or 15 minutes. I will shut it off, and I went to restart. It's got lights and everything, but I hit the start button and I get nothing. Please help. Okay. First off, letting the bike run for 10 or 15 minutes is actually going to drain your battery. So you may have charged the battery to the point where you had enough power in it to start the bike, but letting a 4-cylinder Goldwing with a fixed stator, not an alternator, letting it idle actually drains your battery. The stator on a 4-cylinder Goldwing does not make enough power at idle to actually charge the battery. That's why if your battery is dead and you have a 4-cylinder Goldwing, if you let the engine get down to idle, it'll actually quit because the generator, the stator, doesn't actually create enough energy to spark the engine. It's actually at idle running off your battery. So if you are going to charge the bike, you actually need to go out and ride it in traffic so the engine is up above 1,500, 2,000 RPM, because that's when it really starts to charge. So that's the first problem. You probably did charge the battery up enough to start the bike, but then let it idle, which killed the battery again. You said you had lights and everything. You obviously have enough power in the battery to run the lights, but that's nowhere near the amount of energy it takes to actually crank the engine over. So my recommendation for you, if the battery's okay, and it might still be okay, get a battery tender. Plug it in, let it charge, let the thing do its thing to get the battery up into full state of charge, into good condition. See if that fixes your problem. If it still goes down and it's not taking a charge properly, then it might be time for a new battery. All right, that's our 3 questions for episode 9. I hope that was helpful to you. If you like what you saw here, please click like, subscribe, click that little bell down below. It really helps us out when you do that. Also, don't forget to check out the GoldwingDocs forum. We've got so many friendly people here. If you have a question like this you want answered today, definitely go on the forum. I'll put a link to it below. Ask your question. We've got lots of people who are experts who can help you out. Thanks for watching.